master move.
So, Ashley Goodall, thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast. Um, Ashley, you are the former chief learning officer at Deloitte, and you're a noted author. You previously had a book, Nine Lies About Work: A Free-Thinking Leader's Guide to the Real World, and most recently, the book I want to talk to you about today, The Problem with Change and the Essential Nature of Human Performance. But Ashley, a lot of times I like to start with these executive conversations with taking us back to your early days. Ashley, what was your first job? What was that like?
My first job,
Sure.
I was a customer service representative for a financial company in the UK. And I used to go into the office every day, and log into a dumb terminal that spoke to a computer 200 miles away that we called a mainframe, and used to put my headphones on, and the switchboard would put people through to me, and I would say, customer service, how can I help you? And they would talk to me about the loan product that they got from this company and what they didn't understand, or why the payment was late, or what was difficult, and I would try to help them out. That was actually my my first paid employment.
So, were there any lessons from that job that you still carry with you?
I think millions. I mean, I think our first jobs shape us in so many ways because it's our first sort of exposure to the real grown-up stuff. I mean, I can remember thinking people have purchased financial products and they have no idea what they've got. No idea. Because they thought they were purchasing a car. And you sign here and you get the car, and then Ashley calls up and says, "We need you to send Ashley a check." And you're like, "I got the car from the car dealer." So, I mean, that was one. It was interesting to see how different folks from different backgrounds came together to form a team, which has been an eternal interest of mine. And how, I was there fresh out of undergraduate, and the guy sitting across from me, I think, had just started work when he was 16, and we were doing the same job. Um, the one that I remember most, which is actually relevant possibly to the conversation we're going to have today, is that one day one of the senior managers from the office that contained the mainframe computer, so head office, showed up, and we were in a big open plan office, probably 150 people across this office, sitting in rows of desks, and there wasn't a PA system. So he stood on a desk at the end of the room. He climbed onto the desk, and we were like, why is he climbing on the desk? And then he called out to the switchboard, stop the phones, hold the calls. And then he said, "I'm terribly sorry, you're all to be made redundant. We've decided to close the office. Your managers have details of your severance packages. Thanks very much."
Wow.
And that was a moment of change. And for me, it was in my first job. I was going to find another job. I'd been doing this job because I needed a little bit of income, and I was sort of figuring out where my life was going to go. For some people, they've been there for 15 years. For some people, that was their income, that was their livelihood gone. And it was sobering to see that.
Wow. And so, on one end of the spectrum, there's the guy from the home office standing on a desk, and on the other end, there's the story you tell in the book about Nokia giving employees an entire year's notice,
Exactly.
which is crazy. I mean, I guess crazy good because I, tell me about that, because it really shows a keen interest in the people. Yeah, I feel like a lot of organizations would be scared to give their employees that much notice, thinking that they would check out. But can you kind of pick that apart for us?
The thing I keep running into of going around the world and talking to people in businesses and talking to employees is that most people want to do the right thing. And most people are grateful if their employer upholds their end of the bargain. Um, so I don't know. I mean, I read the story of Nokia, and just to fill in some of the picture here, Nokia announced a big layoff and said, "Everybody, you've got a year. We'll provide assistance for you to find other jobs. We'll provide coaching on your resumes. We'll connect you to recruiters, and we are going to judge ourselves not by how much money we save on the layoff, but by how many of our people have their next thing lined up when they leave here." So that was a profound shift in attitude and spirit and objective and measure. Um, Today, for the most part, when we do big layoffs at work, our measure is how much money can we save and how quickly can we get you lot out the door? How fast can we get you off the payroll? And so what Nokia did was very, very different. I wouldn't be worried if I were a Nokia leader that people are gonna check out. I would expect a little bit of checking out because you just turn their lives upside down and it's hard. And I would expect a little bit of time spent looking for other things. But, if you talk to people who are in companies right now who are in the midst of downsizing or changing direction, or most people show up every day, most people
Mhm.
do what's expected of them. I think a little bit of insight as to why comes from actually some of the studies of soldiers in foxholes, which is
Mhm.
another thing I touched on somewhere in the book.
Sure.
And, the lesson from that is that actually, when you go and talk to people in combat and say, why don't you just quit and go home? They don't go because this is a just war. They don't go because the strategy is one I believe in. They go because I need to look after my friends. I need to look after my teammates. I need to look after my platoon mates. I need to look after my buddies. So I think what we get wrong is that we confuse organizational thought,
Mhm.
strategy, mission, priority, resource, objective with human thought, affiliation, belonging, motivation, pride, energy, fun, humor. And when we try and have one satisfy the needs of the other, really weird stuff happens.
I think one of the things I really took away from your book and what I found really interesting was the, kind of going back to this military sort of example is that, um, the role of the team, or in the military example, the role of the platoon, um, those relationships, the team is more integral. The team is actually, the longer a team works together, the more efficient it becomes, and these relationships are built where people work for each other. But in this generation, of Christensen, saying that we need to disrupt things, we're kind of constantly blowing up platoons and putting them back together. So I guess Christensen's thought is that disruption can be a catalyst for change, but in a lot of ways, disruption can actually, pull the brake on an effective workforce, right?
Well, yeah, I think the main point that I'm trying to get across in the book, said in one way, is that if we think about company things and then human things, as I said a minute ago,
Hmm.
and it's tricky or dangerous or counterproductive when you impose company level ideas on human level trends or traits. One of the company level things or economy level things is this idea of disruption. And if you say, well, at a company level, disruption is something we need to face into because otherwise we could lose our business. Okay. I can argue for or against that. People have argued for and against it. One person who argued in favor of that thought was Clayton Christensen, as you said. But that doesn't mean that constant disruption is something that works particularly well for humans at a human level. And so there's a conundrum to be unraveled. There's a tension. There's an explanation of why life in large companies can be so hard, because at the sort of at the organizational level, people are going, well, we've got to change this, and 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 we've got to fix this, and we've got to tweak this, and we've got to reinvent this, we've got to upgrade this, we've got to reboot this, which, by the way, is constant in any organization of any size. Meanwhile, at human scale, people massively struggle with, you changed my team. I don't know what's coming next. I don't know how any of this makes sense. How come you're saying we should tack to the right, and the last guy said we should tack to the left, and the guy before that had us tacking to the right again? How come we have decentralized and then re-centralized and then decentralized again? How come it's all about the customer, then it's all about the market, then it's all about the customer, then it's all about the market? Make sense of all of this for me. I can't. And that is something that I think any good capitalist business leader trying to maximize the yield of people's honest effort should pay great attention to.
Well, in the book you talk about, I guess, Milton Friedman placed the focus on managing through the eyes of shareholder value, and in that number-driven motivation kind of turned around and resulted in management thinking of the employees as less than human. And I think you referred to them as coin-operated people. Like, well, it's like the one simple solution for any problem is throwing money at a person. Well, great. In terms of, instead of looking at how do I meet the human needs or the psychological needs of my employees, well, maybe I can just throw more dollars at them. And if this person doesn't want those dollars, I can find somebody else who does.
Yeah. And that's to fundamentally misunderstand what makes us all tick. So, what I'm trying to, there's a lot of, let's put it like this. There's a lot of thinking out there that explains from an economic or an economic theory or a finance perspective how a company should be run. My observation is that a company contains an awful lot of humans, and that what we lack in the world is any systemic, rigorous understanding of how thinking through the lens of what do people need to do their best work should inform how we run companies. And if you started down that path and you said, all right, let's never mind Friedman for a second, never mind Christensen, never mind the market for a few minutes, put all of that stuff aside and think instead from first principles about how would you build a place for people to do great work. Because if we can build a place for people to do great work, maybe at the end of the day, the market will be happy. Maybe at the end of the day, the economists will be happy. Maybe at the end of the day, the customers will be happy. So a non crazy proposition. Think from the people up and out. And you then started off by drawing up a list and saying, well, what actually impairs people from doing their best work? Top of the list would be constant change and disruption. Top of the list. So I think there's room for a rethink of not only what we do in our organizations, but where those ideas come from, what we're trying to solve for. We are not, I would argue, solving for short-term economic efficiency. We are solving for long-term value and prosperity. And the second you say long-term, you have to solve for humans. You have to solve for the people who are going to produce the innovation over, by the way, decades. Most innovation isn't done in a financial quarter. Most innovation isn't done in a year either. I mean, we're all, desperately trying to catch up with AI at the moment. But that wasn't that somebody started thinking about in
Mhm.
2023, to be clear. Um, Before that, you can go back and look at, I don't know, I think one of the things that's massively changed our worlds is global positioning.
Mhm.
And there's a technology that took scientists in all sorts of different places decades to come up with. Probably started, you could argue it started in the 1950s. So innovation is not a turn on a dime thing, and it requires humans to contribute their best ideas.
Mhm.
And there is an environment in which that is easy, and there is an environment in which that is hard. And my argument, in a nutshell, is that it's probably not a horrible idea to try and create the environment in which it's easy.
Well, I think one of the things that you know, keeps demonstrating itself throughout the book is how important it is for employees to feel like they're being heard. You referred to terms like learned helplessness and lack of agency. Can you kind of touch on the importance of acknowledging the employee's voice?
I'm not sure I would say voice. I think the real thing is that when, at a human level, when the link between cause and effect is eroded, our brains get scrambled. So if I'm doing something every day because I've been told this will make things better, and then but I can't see that it makes things better, that's really, really hard. If I'm doing something every day because I'm told this is my job and this is to make things better, but then someone else comes along and says, no, the opposite thing or a different thing will make things better, and the other thing you were doing actually didn't think make things better. And how silly could we have been to think that the thing we were doing, but now we do this. In all of these, we see little erosions between my effort and some outcome in the world beyond me. And I think it is certainly from the research I've done, it is fundamental to human sanity to be able to connect things we do with some impact, some change, some bearing, some friction on the world outside us. And that's what we erode. So learned helplessness, of course, is a series of experiments that show that when you train an animal or a person, that nothing they do makes a difference. In other words, that none of their actions has any impact on the world outside them, they stop trying. Uh, so yeah, again, it's about connecting the dots. What's weird is that we go about this because I think most of us have the seed of this idea that it's a healthy thing to be able to see I made a difference.
Mhm.
Um, I actually feel it's more than healthy. It's probably an essential thing to feel that I made a difference. Um, Now, the way we typically go about this in large organizations is we tell people the difference that they've made at the scale of the organization, and we tell people the difference by putting it on a slide with worthy words. So we say, the purpose of the organization is this. Now then, you all happy? Because now everything you're doing advances that purpose, doesn't it? And it's a lovely purpose, and we're all very excited about the purpose, and you should come to work because of the purpose. And there we go. Purpose is done. You now have meaningful work because we have written down for you the meaning of your work. But meaning isn't one of those company level things we were talking about before. Meaning is a human level thing. Meaning is something that I arrive at for myself. I look at the world around me and go, what does my work mean to me? Now, for me to do that, my work actually has to be coherent in some way. I've got to be able to see that I have some impact in the world beyond me. But then once I've got some impact in the world beyond me, I I determine what that means. I determine where the spiritual value is in that, or the economic value, or the familial value, or whatever matters to me. So it's another case of it's got to come down to the teams. And teams are a beautiful place to do this because you can see the impact of a team on other teams around it, and you can see the impact of you within a team. You can see your colleagues can come and say, "Thank you for doing X." Thank you for doing X is a beautiful piece of micro evidence of meaning, if you like, that you never get from a sort of statement of organizational purpose.
Sure. There was one part in the book that is closely related to what you're just discussing, where you were talking about the importance of the one-on-one meetings with the manager, and it reminded me I have someone close to me who was recently changed jobs, and at her last job. Um, Her manager was scheduled to have a one-on-one with her every week. But that would only happen probably once out of every 4 weeks. There was constant rescheduling, missing for one thing or another. And it was a source of sort of constant frustration. And you talk about that in the book, how important it is to uh, to maintain that obligation, to be able to provide that feedback so that the employee understands that, you know, that, well, there are a lot of different benefits there, correct?
Yeah, and if you get really good at it, the thing that's happening inside the one-on-one is not feedback, it's attention. I mean, what I've introduced at a couple of different large companies is a weekly one-on-one where the agenda is driven by the employee, not by the team leader. So it's not show up and pin back your ears and I'm going to read out my list of things for you to do this week and my feedback on the things you did last week, and you're going to write them all down and nod your head and do the whole active listening thing that we were all taught to do so that I don't get annoyed with you and then off you go. It's not that. It is, hey Craig, um, thanks for making the time. What are your priorities this week and how can I help with them? What other help do you need from me? And what lit you up last week and what frustrated you last week? Let's talk about those too. And it's attention. It's attention. It's a series of questions where the employee goes, okay, this is my world and this is where I need somebody to check me and confirm I'm on the right track, or somebody to move things out of the way. And once you understand it's attention that we need, not feedback, attention, then you understand why canceling 3 out of 4 of them is crazy making for somebody. Because when you get attention like that, it's fabulous. You get half an hour of solo boss time and it's not focused on boss's agenda, it's focused on your agenda. That's super helpful, super energizing, super motivating, super satisfying, and quite a lot of fun. So you get one of those, and then you're like, "Oh, that'll be great." Well, next week I'll keep some notes, and I'll prepare for next week's, and I'll have some more list of things for my boss. And then the day before it's cancelled, and you're like, "Well, ugh, okay." So you do the same thing the next week, and again it's cancelled, and sooner or later, again, you start phoning it in. At Cisco, we quantified this in terms of the relationship between employee engagement and the frequency of a check-in conversation. And what we found was that once every 3 weeks is sort of flat. Engagement neither goes up nor down. Once every 2 weeks, it goes up. Once every week, it goes up a lot. And here's the weird one, especially with regard to the example you gave, every 4 weeks, it goes down. So you are better off as a team leader not having one-on-ones than you are doing monthly one-on-ones, because monthly one-on-ones annoy people for the intervening 3 weeks, and the annoyance outweighs the value of the check-in in the first place. The trick is frequency is a thing. And frequency is the thing, not just in one-on-one conversations. Frequency of rhythm of event is a thing in human psychological health. It's why we like rituals. It's why we're like knowing that a weekend is a thing. Like there's no, if you look at divisions of time, years and months and days all come from the heavens. Weeks don't. We made weeks up. There's nothing astronomical that happens on a weekly basis. But 7 days with 1 or 2 days of rest at the end seems to work really well for humans. It gives us a rhythm. It gives life a periodicity. Those things seem to be very psychologically healthy for us. So there are all sorts of things that live according to rhythms. And one of them, when you think about attention to me at work as the product of a ritual, a rhythm, you realize that it's very helpful because attention has a half-life. And, again, your boss has one check-in with you and it's magnificent, and then ignores you for 3 weeks. You spend the 3 weeks resenting your boss and working maybe a little bit less hard, certainly being less engaged in your work. So rhythm and frequency and periodicity are a beautiful thing. And then maybe the last thing to say about all of that is that that is not a constraint on innovation. That is a foundation
Hmm.
for innovation. If you pick the most sort of stereotypical, but also probably important example of innovation in American corporate history, you finish up looking at Lockheed Martin and the development of the Blackbird, the first sort of stealth spy plane, first use creation of stealth technology, and a thing that went at 3 times the speed of sound. How did they create that thing? What they did is they took some engineers and put them in a thing that they came to be called the Skunk Works, and they had a separate building, separate resources, separate management, and all sorts of stability. They said essentially corporate life is inimical to innovation. So we need you to be protected from us, from the rest of us. We need to take you away from us.
Right.
Otherwise, you won't be able to do breakthrough work. This is the opposite thinking of how we
Right.
think about innovation today, where we think if I leave you alone, you'll sit there and do nothing. But if I prod you with great frequency and increasing energy to move fast to break things and turn things on their head and shake stuff up, then you will somehow produce innovation. That's actually not how innovation works, and it's not how humans work.
Yeah, I found a really interesting conversation in your book, the conversation about routines, and I don't think I'd ever really thought about the importance of routines in terms of it allowing, um, it allows more room in my working memory to be able to process things, right? In terms of a computer, it's freeing up my RAM to be able to handle more tasks on my desktop because it's less, if I relocate, if I'm taking on a new job, there's so much of the new that's taking up my working memory that there's no capacity left for other things, the things that are most important, right? Can you talk a little bit about the importance of just routines?
I mean, you said it very well. Um, when you don't have to decide every day anew, from opening your eyes in the morning, what sequence you're going to get ready for work, how you're going to choose your outfit for the day, how you're going to get to work. Today, am I going to drive or take the plane or have my personal helicopter come and pick me up or cycle or hang glide? You don't have to think about any of those things. Am I going to have coffee in the morning or tea, or am I going to have breakfast? Blah, blah, blah. If my favorite example of this is actually the number of things, the number of choices that you make on a daily basis between opening your eyes and sitting down to work, whether you work at an office or at a home office. And if you actually wrote a list of all of those, it would be a big, long list of decisions to make. There is a thing called decision fatigue. People have discovered, for example, that parole boards are more lenient at the end of a session than at the beginning of a session. So you want your case for parole to come up just before lunch or just at the very end of the day, because it's just they get tired of making decisions. So there is a thing called decision fatigue. And if you think about the number of decisions in a day that we automate, or even just between opening our eyes and showing up at work, there's a lot of decisions. So if you're not having to answer all of those questions for yourself on a daily basis because you have your beautiful phrase, morning routine, that makes things easier. That shows up at work as well. We don't show up at work on our team on a Monday and go, should we have a staff meeting this week? What day should we have it on? Who should be invited? What should be on the agenda? You have a staff meeting. It happens on Wednesdays. We do it every Wednesday at noon or whatever. And these people come and this is the agenda. So that's another piece of architecture that we don't have to design for ourselves every single time. Do I have a one-on-one with my boss this week, this month, this year? Does my boss do one-on-ones? I don't know. What's Monday's choice? Let's decide it again on Tuesday. Let's decide it again on Wednesday. You don't work like this. So there are certain ways in which having a bit of a social architecture and an architecture of interaction frees your mind up. And again, it's not just that you don't have to decide, but it's also that you can look out in the future and know it will come round again. And know it will come round again-ness is really, really helpful because then when you have a thought for your boss, you don't have to send the email to your boss. You can write it on the list for the check-in. And then when you have a thing to share with the team, you don't have to spam the team with the whole thing that they've all got to read and be interrupted. You can save it for the team meeting. So it allows us to create containers for interactions. So it's not just reducing the decision load, it's having these future containers where you go, oh, this goes in this, this goes in this, this goes in this, this goes in this. Now, if I have an exception to all of those, now I can get into email or IM or ping someone or whatever. It provides structure for collaboration. And collaboration, we tend to think of collaboration as something that is necessarily free form. But I actually think it's something that benefits very much from a little structure, not of thought, not of contribution, not of idea, but of where those things will be shared and presented and wrestled with and shaped.
I remember back during the financial crisis, unemployment was high, money was tight, and I remember walking into a Starbucks and the marketing signage that they had put on the window outside was "Take comfort in rituals." And I always thought that was a really astute observation that, hey, it was as if they understood, um, money's tight. You're going to be choosing to pinch pennies, but you know, you need to invest in rituals. And I thought it was really clever that they were tapping into that.
Yeah, I mean um, there's beauty, and it's a very human sort of beauty. Take comfort in rituals. The other interesting linguistic thing that happened in the pandemic was when we all started working from home full time, or those of us who were working from home full time, people said this is the new normal. Um, and of course, no one knew. You couldn't possibly opine in I don't know, April, May, June of 2020 whether the pandemic was going to last forever or whether it's going to last for another 4 weeks and whether people will go back to the office or not. Well, you couldn't possibly opine. But everyone was like, no, this is the new normal. And that is, again, a reach for certainty, a reach for if we tell ourselves that this is the new normal, then we can all adjust our minds to it and then we can get back to work. Whereas if somebody says, no, this might not be the new normal, it might change again, and it might change again, and it might change again, then it's very difficult for people to go, all right, I can't get back to my, because where am I going to be working? I don't know. Is it, what? So there is you can see in all of these little expressions, embrace ritual, this is the new normal. You can see this yearning for stability. Stability is a foundation for health. And stability in a way is a foundation for contribution. You can get back to doing what you do. It's okay. Here's the container for it. Here is the shape of the world. Worry less about the shape of the world. It's fine. That's what people are trying to say to other people. And it is an implicit recognition of the colossal value of stability, the essential nature of stability to human contribution.
Sure. Towards the end of the book, in the summation of all this, you talk about this sort of Venn diagram of two circles: the people focus, performance focus, and how it's we think of those circles as not touching, barely touching. It'd be great if there was a larger amount of overlap, but it just really becomes obvious the awkward place that human resources often finds itself, where it it's sitting outside of um of this structure. um I my wife was speaking with somebody once who was a human resources professional and is like, oh, I think I think I might like human resources. And the person was like, no, I don't know if you would, because you really can't be anyone's friend. Can you, yeah, can you tell me about the awkward place that this third state
Yeah.
that human resources finds itself?
So it starts by, and here's what I hope feels like an insight. Um, that the interests of a business and the interests of the people in the business, the human interests of the people in the business, are not one and the same thing. So the way we tend to think about organizations is there is a bunch of economic interests, there's a bunch of fiduciary duty to shareholders, there's a bunch of company level things, and everything in the company exists to serve those, and everything and it is in everybody's interest to do nothing but serve those things. So there's this big, and in the book, I say you can call this the first circle. This is the circle of company interests, and we're all here to serve those. But then you quickly realize that actually, if you think about human interests and human interests at work, that there are some things which actually aren't very much in the interests of the company. People like to go home at the end of the day. Now, our employers have now given us cell phones so they can reach us 24/7. But, back when I came up and I was doing my customer service job that we talked about at the beginning of our conversation, at 5 o'clock, somebody shut the phones off and everyone went to the bus and went home. And that was it. And that was lovely. That was massively not in the interests of our employer. If the employer could have had us work 24/7 and not had to stop work, obviously they would have done that. But there's a recognition that, okay, there's some human stuff and we've got to take account of the human stuff. We sort of say to ourselves, in broad terms, you know what? The fact that the human interests and the business interests aren't completely aligned, we will address that by paying people. And we compensate you. And it's compensation for the fact that there's some stuff here which isn't really in your interests, but having money is in your interest. So we're going to sort of balance all of that stuff out. Then you come to HR and you go, all right, in this world, the interests of the business or the interests of the humans, where's HR sit in that?
Mm-hmm.
And for the most part, HR has been told by the business and has come to believe that it exists to advance the people elements of the business interest, do the people-y stuff in the first circle. So when the business says it's in our interest to cut labor costs, we're going to lay off 1,000 people, it's HR's job to make sure that that's done humanely, if you like, or efficiently, or without breaking labor laws. This I think is why the friend in your story said people aren't necessarily going to like you if you're in HR because you're the execution arm of a bunch of business interests that sometimes are in marked conflict with human interests. So that's the first thing. There's a tension between what humans want at work and what the business wants. But then the second thing, and I think this is where all the magic is there's an overlap between human interests and business interests. There are some things that make people joyful that also make businesses better. We've talked about innovation. People love coming up with new ideas. It makes us happy. It makes us feel like, oh my goodness me, again, there's a connection between a thing I did and some impact out in the world. And I can see my idea could strengthen that connection. I could contribute. That would be lovely. I've come up with a new way of doing this. Wonderful. Every business wants people who come up with new ways of doing things. People like to grow their skills. There are few things more psychologically rewarding as getting better at something. That's a remarkable feeling to have, a remarkable piece of awareness about yourself, that you are a machine, if you like, that can grow. You are a muscle that can be strengthened. That's enormously it's a wonderful feeling to have. And of course, businesses love people who get better at doing their jobs because, look, we don't have to hire other people who are better at your job than you are. You are now better at your job than old you was. Um, People love being part of teams. People love being part of little communities of belonging and reinforcing and support and social connection. And companies are smart enough to realize that if they don't have good teams, they don't have good anything. So there are some things that are in the human interest and the business interest. And my argument is that HR hasn't made enough of a priority to address those things, to understand those things, to advocate for those things, to preserve those things at the expense of things that are only in the interest of the business. Because one of the things that isn't in the intersection is constant change. Constant change detracts from human contribution. But stability, ritual, predictability are actually the foundation for a whole bunch of things that are very good for the business. And they're good for the business because they are also good for the humans in the business and help us do our work.
Given your experience as SVP of Methods and Intelligence at Cisco, I imagine you have opinions about the best practices for gathering and analyzing data from your own employees.
I
Well,
can, yeah, I can give you some thoughts about what's not a best practice just to start off. Um, it's we're having this conversation in election season. There is an awful lot of opinion polling going on right now, and I don't want to get into the niceties of political opinion polling, but I'll tell you what the salient features from a information gathering, from a data reliability perspective are of opinion polling. You do not poll 300 plus million citizens of the United States when you poll about 1,000 of them. And then the art of polling is to make sure that the 1,000 you speak to are in some way a reliable microcosm of the 300 million you didn't speak to. That's how opinion polling works. And because it uses this, we take a small sample that we hope is representative of the big, you can do it very quickly. So you can have ongoing polls. Now, here's how we do this at work. We're a little bit confused about the 1,000-person thing. We want all our employees to answer the annual engagement survey. So clearly we can only do it once a year because it's a big effort to get everybody to answer the thing. But anyway, we'll have and because we're only going to do it once a year, we're going to have a big, long list of questions. So we'll have 60 questions. We'll launch them in the fall. It'll take us 3 months to harangue everybody to respond to the questionnaire. In the end, we'll get half the people and we'll go, that's pretty good. And then we'll do the analysis and then we'll share the results. And in March, your team leader gets a call saying, the engagement of your team is this. And they go, well, it's not this. It was this in the fall when you started. But since then, 82 things have happened. And so what you're telling me is you're giving me 6 months ago history. And you can do that. When you do it 1 year over year, all the team leaders have changed because we love changing stuff up. The economic environment has changed. The teams have changed. It's it's another one of these things where constant light touch frequency is super valuable. and is much more valuable than massive, in-depth, unwieldy thing. So the way that we did this at Cisco was we took the approach, the polling approach, and applied it to sentiment surveys. So we would have a 3,000 person sample of the organization, which at the time was about 75,000 people. So a fraction of the organization that we chose for representativeness, and we would go to them and we would oversample a little bit so that if we got 2,000 responses, we could make sure we chose the 2,000 that were a microcosm in demographic terms of the entire organization. And you could get an engagement survey every quarter or every month or how often you wanted to ping 3,000 people and ask them to respond to a survey. And, there were enough groups of 3,000 people in the organization that you didn't need to trouble anyone more than once a year. And you could get an ongoing sense of it. And then the other thing that got really, really interesting, and I think probably there's much more to be done here, is that with the advent of machine learning and a little bit AI, but there was a lot of machine learning in this, you can actually have a system that will analyze open text responses. So you can say to people, you give people a text box and say, describe your relationship with your boss. And they type, and you can have a piece of analysis look at whether the sentiment in there is positive or negative and certain other characteristics of how somebody is feeling expressed in their words. So from a very small sample, in other words, you can get a very rich collection of data. But the only way you get there is to give up the big, long annual thing and get to the small, local, but representative, frequent thing.
Absolutely. Well, Ashley, I really appreciate your time today. The book, The Problem with Change and the Essential Nature of Human Performance is available wherever people buy their books. And this has been a great conversation. And is there another book on the horizon, Ashley?
Oh, it's funny. People have asked me that question, and I'll tell you what I feel. My feeling in response to that is that I come up with one good idea about every 4 years. And we sort of talk about ideas and innovation as though you can just sort of crank the handle and out they come. I've never found that to be true for me. I've probably had in the course of my career 8 really good ideas. And so it might be a while before the next one comes along and I can write about it. But if it does, I would love to, because I love putting thoughts into words and the discipline that forces on you to be clear in your thinking. And I that's something I enjoy doing very much.
Well, I hope it's not 4 years before we speak again, but I really appreciate you joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And so,
Master Move.